Ethics professor Michael Mendiola once said that the ultimate ethical question, the one that determines our actions, our opinions, and how far we extend ourselves for others, almost always is this: whose suffering matters? Whose suffering matters? This question, and Jesus' answer, as well as our own answers, is critical to the scope of our compassionate action. Because the truth is, suffering is everywhere. Some people live with quiet daily pain, exhaustion, loss, scarcity, anxiety. Others bear wounds that are obvious and urgent, and we can't hold it all. If we tried to feel everyone's pain, we'd collapse under the weight of it. So the question lingers: whose suffering makes it past our defenses? Who stirs our hearts enough that we feel compelled to act? In this worship series over the next 4 weeks, we're exploring change-making, what being a compassion-driven change-maker might look like in our lives and in the life of our church. Each week, we focus on a story or two about Jesus, the ultimate compassion-driven change-maker. Each of these stories illustrates the pattern Jesus regularly turned to as he acted as a compassion-driven change-maker in the lives of the people and communities around him. Every act of change-making in Jesus' life and in ours begins with compassion. The story that we call the Good Samaritan in Luke's Gospel is well known. In fact, it's about compassion, pretty evident. But the irony of that story is that sometimes it gets lost in its familiarity. So too do our ideas about who's a change maker. Jesus is answering a question set to him by an attorney who wants to know some particulars about identity and behavior and exactly how to define a neighbor. Jesus turns that question on its head and answers with a story not about how to define a neighbor, but how to define what it means to be a neighbor. Out of the 3 who encountered the ailing person beaten and robbed, the one who showed mercy or compassion was the neighbor. And it turned out to be the unexpected Samaritan, often characterized negatively in that time by the Jewish people. In the reading from the Gospel of Mark, Jesus has just learned that John the Baptizer, his cousin and friend, has been executed. Grief-stricken, he withdraws with his disciples, longing for solitude. But the crowds follow him. Thousands of people pressing in, hungry and searching for guidance. If we were in Jesus' place, we might have said, "Not today." But Jesus looks at the crowd and sees them, really sees them. He sees their confusion, their fear, their hunger, both physical and spiritual. And although his own heart is heavy, he feels compassion for them. That compassion becomes a wellspring of creative action. They're hungry, he says to the disciples. We have to do something about it. And this is how change-making always begins. The heart of someone who's a change-maker is moved. Some wrongness that might have stayed just out there, broken, unfair, not right but not my problem, gets inside you. You feel the way that brokenness is hurting others, and you know you have to do something about it. Because compassion says, I am moved by you, and I must act. What if change-making, what if our passion to make a difference in this world were rooted in an inexhaustible source of connection and love? What if, when we got tired, or our love ran out, or when we looked at our neighbor with their foot jammed in the door and thought, I'm sorry, I can't help you, we could draw on the compassion of Jesus, whose love fed the hungry and healed the broken, even on the days he was grieving and tired himself. These stories remind us that when our hearts are full of compassion, who we are and whatever we have in our hands will always be enough. Oftentimes, we think it's up to the church to show us how to be a neighbor. However, this series invites us to consider that important knowledge actually lies in our day-to-day experiences with what the world needs as we encounter people in our lives, our work, our community. What if, like Jesus, we turned questions about faithfulness to the church and stewardship upside down? What if we approached our discipleship and our stewardship as a church with this liturgical meaning the work of the people, knowledge? Where do we see the need for mercy and compassion as we walk along the road of our lives? What are we so passionate about that we'll risk crossing culturally imposed boundaries to address a need? What if we could see the value of church in a different way? Church as valuable for sustaining the way we want to live in the world, the life we want to live outside of the building. Whether feeding thousands with a few loaves and fish or teaching through parables, Jesus shows us what it looks like to be a compassion-driven change maker. He models 4 essential traits that we call the principles of change making. First, Jesus begins with compassion. Then he collaborates with God and with others. And then he shows creative new ways of thinking and solving problems. And finally, he empowers others to act on behalf of their own healing and the community's restoration. Compassion-driven change-making grows from the desire to live in a way patterned after the way Jesus lived. In both stories, Jesus follows all 4 of those principles that I just outlined. He starts with compassion for human need. He collaborates with others. He invites creative participation, and he empowers the community to be part of the solution. Being a change maker means living this same pattern. It's not only the work of institutions or church programs, it's the daily ministry of every follower of Christ. Calling upon our God-given compassion for others enables us to envision God's dream for human flourishing and act toward it. Compassion is the motivation behind impactful and lasting change. When we act from compassion, our small offerings multiply like the bread and fish in Jesus' hands. Jesus asked his disciples, "How much bread do you have?" And it was enough. It's always enough when our hearts are full of compassion. So this morning, I have a little exercise I'd like you to do. I want you to take that small piece of paper that you were given earlier and write down 2 things. On one side, write a word or phrase that represents a gift you receive in this nest, this church. A word or a phrase that represents a gift you receive here in this church. It's not a quiz. There's no right answer, just whatever comes to you. And on the other side, write a word or phrase that represents something you see in the world that's calling your heart to compassion. What need in our community or world is speaking most clearly to you in this moment? What need in our community or world is speaking most clearly to you in this moment? Now, writing these things down isn't a final answer. Doesn't mean you have to stick to those things. Rather, it's a beginning. It's an important step toward claiming who you are as a change maker. It's one way of saying, "Here, Jesus, is my bread and fish. Use them." When compassion moves through us, it transforms into passion, and that passion rooted in God's heart, becomes change-making, rooted in a love that heals the world. May it be so. Amen and amen.